Hello and welcome once again to episode 114 of Code Completion. We're a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So it's towards the end of the year. In fact, we'll probably be releasing this days before the end of the year. And what better time to look back on everything that happened, right? It's been an exciting second finale half of the Apple Silicon transition that turns out not done. But it was exciting nonetheless because we got M2 processors, right?
Yeah. Along with that, we saw the second half of the M1 series processors. We got, the M1 Max, M1 Ultra. So we got, those were in 2022, right? Ooh.
I
don't know.
think 2021 was when we saw the Pro and the Max. Did the Ultra come out? I think the Ultra came out in 2022.
Let's see. Man, the years have blended together these last couple of years.
They're all one.
I don't even know. The Mac Studio came out in 2022. So I think that was the first one, or the only one with the Ultra, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, kind of. Like Dimitri said, though, we've got the Apple Silicon transition basically done, which is exciting. We talked about this an episode or two ago about there are a few lingering devices on the Apple Store that you can still buy that are Intel machines, including the Mac Pro. So that's kind of the real finale, and I think you can still buy like a Mac Mini with that, whatever. I think they're 9th generation Intel chips if you wanted to for some reason. I don't know. So there's that.
I think Mac Mini Colo is probably Mac Stadium, whatever they're called now. I think they're probably the biggest clientele to those kinds of machines, along with now Amazon and probably Microsoft too, where they are now hosting them. And they probably don't have the ARM versions up and running. Like, I know GitHub, for instance, does not have GitHub Actions for any of the modern stuff anymore. Like, you just can't host it on their thing. And I posted up a guide a while ago if you want to host it yourself, like something that we were doing before we had a dedicated machine to do it. We just each of us developers all hosted a VM that had the GitHub Runner stuff on it. And like our machines were the VMs, and we hardly noticed as developers. So it's definitely something that if you need GitHub Actions to run on the latest and greatest thing, and you have 3 or 4 people in the team, well, that's probably good enough to get like the PRs going and all that. Especially if you do need to test iOS specific stuff. So that's definitely something that you can do if you need to run macOS 13. If you need to run the latest Xcode, because otherwise it's kind of hard to get a test environment that will do that, that's already hosted by GitHub. I'm sure other services all have this kind of stuff, but yeah, that's something that is available to you. Nice.
Yeah, we do something similar. We just actually recently switched over to using GitHub, I think mostly for GitHub Actions. We were on Bitbucket before, but I don't quite know how we do it, but we have a GitHub action that doesn't actually use like the GitHub minutes or anything, or I guess it probably does for a little bit of it.
It's self-hosted.
It's right? Self-hosted. We actually
so it doesn't use any of it.
Yeah, so we use Mac Stadium with it, like some M1 series Mac, probably just the Mac Mini, and that's running all of our simulators and running through all of our both UI and just unit tests as well. So kind of cool that that's an option. And can't. I wonder, I think we talked about this a little bit a while ago too, which would be like if they come out with some actual sort of purpose-built rack-mounted Mac again, sort of like the Xserve, but I don't know if, even Mac Stadium would care at this point. I'm sure that all of their infrastructure is set up to handle the size and form factor of the Mac Mini. So if that changed, I'm not sure if they'd even go for it. That makes sense.
They definitely have rack mounted like equipment, so I'm sure they'll welcome it.
Oh, okay.
the way most of these kind of data centers or companies that utilize data centers, because Mac Stadium doesn't run their own data center. They own a cage on a data center. And what a cage is basically like, hey, this is a partitioned part of our floor and you need your IDs to access it. Like we don't have access to it anymore. You guys are renting out this floor space. And we're basically giving you power, AC, and network connections to other services that are run in the same building, for instance. And from there, you put your own racks or not. Otherwise, you can rent just a rack. You can rent just a slice of a rack. There's all sorts of different plans available.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be fun. I'm sure that Apple could fit a pretty cool Mac in even like what they had with the 1U Xserve. You know, I don't know if you split it into like 4 different Mac Mini size or Mac Mini single devices or something. I don't know, or what you could do with that, but the Xserves had 2 processors in them, or at least they could, I think. So, and those were with meaty, hot Intel chips, so you could probably eke out a lot of cooling potential with, those super whatever they are, like 20,000 RPM fans or whatever, and cool a bunch of them in one unit just fine, or make it taller. I don't know, but be cool.
Well, Apple does sell a rack-mounted Mac, right? And that is the Mac Pro. So
yeah,
it's a 5U, but it's something that's available. So here's hoping that Apple can like bring that down to a slimmer form factor. And I would say play to the benefits that you could have had by having a bunch of Mac Minis, for instance, all vertical in the 1U space. Like having a whole bunch of processors is oftentimes more beneficial to having a single processor in like a 1U space, especially when they are so power efficient and so quiet. And that can do quite a lot. Like I've built a farm out of Mac Minis before. And it's quite the capable device, even when it was on Intel. So I can definitely see a lot of benefit to Apple adopting that kind of direction. That said, I don't think they will, but like my little 2 cents there in that past life that kind of worked a lot with that kind of stuff.
Nice. So let's see what else happened this year. I mean, as far as Swift goes, I don't want to necessarily say slowing down, but ever since we've got to Swift 5, which was like 2 years ago already, it's been I guess the large updates have been a little bit slower, but I think things like Xcode have been getting better. I like the GitHub integrations. I think that's great, or just the Git integration with Xcode. I'll use that for pretty basic stuff, and then jump on the terminal or tower when I need to, but that's been great. I remember when let's see, what are we on now? We're on 14. I think it was 13 when they like changed all of the file icons in Xcode, and we were freaking out about it, and now it's not a big deal. So
finally got used to it.
Yeah, it's funny, you're like, oh, this is so different, I absolutely hate it, but now kind of in a retrospective, it's like, yeah, okay, that was cool. And it is kind of nice to be able to differentiate, especially in like what I have for work, where we have a bunch of folders and subfolders for everything, but within each subfolder, there's, depending on where it is in the app, it's got Swift files, but also Objective-C files. So kind of easier to navigate without having to pull over that sidebar to see the file names, because they can sometimes be super long. So tooling has been better. I don't really ever feel like Xcode has been super buggy in the probably in the last year or so that I can think of.
And Swift has gone better, easier and easier to use, right? Like we finally can say if let something open curly brace. So it's like those little tiny things, along with the bigger things like Swift concurrency getting more mature, Swift UI being more mature. Like all of those, I think, have been great this year. And Apple is really hitting it out of the park on those basic fronts. Open sourcing Foundation,
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of potential for Swift and the Swift language as a result of the actions that Apple's taking, kind of modernizing it and bringing it up to speed internally. And that's really accelerating what the open source community can do with it as a result of that, right?
Yeah. Another huge one we talked about a few weeks ago is on Swift.org, they brought over the Swift Evolution. They made that Swift Evolution page, which makes it a lot easier to look at and kind of find things that are in review, that are going to be reviewed, things that were accepted. Excuse me. So that's super nice. I always love let's see, what is it called? The Swift. Just the Swift Programming Language Guide on Swift.org. That's always been nice. That's been there forever. But yeah, I think the dedication that Apple has given alongside and kind of given sort of leeway to let the community also drive Swift has been cool. And yeah, like you said, Swift UI has been, I think, much improved, and we're only going to continue to see it improve and kind of, I think, become what Apple wanted it to be. Like, I remember being there at DubDub when they announced Swift UI, and it seemed all super magical, and it was, but as we quickly found out, it wasn't quite there, especially in kind of the version 1 of Swift UI. So seeing it sort of reach, I wouldn't say parity with UIKit, but reach kind of closer and closer to that parity, and being able to be a little bit more confident in making things. And like, I remember teaching one of the students at the job I was teaching at a few months ago. Like, there's a map view now in SwiftUI, for example. You don't have to use a UI view representable and stuff. So they're kind of inching towards that goal of kind of ultimately probably replacing UIKit entirely, but we're getting there.
Yeah, it's definitely reached maturity, I would say. You can now do pretty much anything you really wanted to do with SwiftUI, at least on iOS. I would say macOS seems to be in a much rougher state, especially once you start wanting to do like normal AppKit kind of things, which is ostensibly what SwiftUI would aim to replace. But AppKit is still the better framework when it comes to needing to lay out standard controls and having windows behave properly and all of that. It seems like it's still a hot mess if you decide to go all in on SwiftUI in that regard. But if you're using SwiftUI for all your custom views, I think you're going to be a whole lot better off than subclassing NSView and then handling drawRect yourself, for instance. So for things like that, I think SwiftUI is continuing to hit it out of the park everywhere. For things like replacing, like building a standardized palette or settings window. I think all of those kinds of things are a bit out of SwiftUI's depth, only because there are significant bugs in SwiftUI that prevent it from being something that's truly magical to use in that kind of environment. Case in point, system settings. The wonderful new app we've been graced with this year that has not escaped shipping has invaded all of our Macs, and it seems to be getting better. And maybe this is the impetus to force Apple to fix a lot of those issues with SwiftUI, because now they have a big time app that's going to see a lot of use by a lot of people, like hitting all those same bugs. So I think that's probably for the better that Apple did kind of go all in on redesigning it and reworking it to be written in SwiftUI. It's just going to be a little bit of a few rough years until we get to that point where we see the other end of it and things are much better as a result.
Yeah. I think another huge thing, I think it was released this year, was Async Await. Is that right?
I think no, Async Await came out before.
Did it?
Yeah, but it did feel like it's starting to make a lot of headway, especially in the open source community for things like Vapor and stuff like that. almost all of Vapor can now be used with async await. Swift Neo is like getting large overhauls to have async await based event loops and stuff like that. So definitely a lot of improvements there. But yeah, it had to come out last year for those improvements to come out this year, right?
Okay. Yeah, well that's kind of where I was going, was all of the I've kind of been doing a fair amount of work with Vapor kind of on the side for a side project with Ben, and that's been just like night and day, I think, improvement for the approachability of using Vapor and getting, like, especially getting into it, is using async await, where don't have to worry about futures anymore. It took me probably an evening to just change everything over to using async await from futures, and it's, no more nested code, no more having to flat map your futures over and over again, and it just made it literally made a world of difference to the approachability of, how easy is it going to be to have to refactor this function if the iOS app needs this different format of JSON, or they want something completely different. How hard is that to really refactor? Made it super, super easy. So unfortunately, as far as my work goes, I haven't had a ton of chances to implement async await. We've talked about it. We have an internal sort of improvement meeting every month to talk about the things we'd like to kind of improve, not necessarily to directly affect sort of the the app, like add functionality or improve the visuals or anything, but things like cleanup, or one that I proposed was moving even a small portion of our app to async await. And we haven't quite got there yet, but we've kind of figured out where to start. So I'm really excited to kind of take what I've learned from Vapor and learning async await in kind of that open source server side context and apply it to sort of normal iOS code. And I think that, if I were to start building a new app today, I'd most definitely just use async await from the get-go instead of having to deal with, normal GCD or anything. So that's something that, sort of looking forward, I know that async, just from my own experience, I guess, async await is super, like, mature. I think that was one of the things, and you can probably correct me here, that was one of the things that like Tim, the Vapor devs, were talking about. It's not quite as performant as GCD or as maybe Neo's futures. I can't quite remember what it was.
Oh, it absolutely is, but the underpinnings were all being done on these different thread pools, so there was a lot of context switching. So until Neo was implemented with async await, everything would be a little slower, but the development productivity is so much better that they decide to go that route anyways, right?
Gotcha. So I guess, is Neo now on async await too?
Not quite, but it's making the steps to get there.
Cool. So
like
that, I think that was a huge thing for me personally as a developer, was like learning async await and being like, this is the future, and like not rebelling like I rebelled with Codable, and like I took so long to learn Codable, and that was my mistake for not trusting that it would be a good thing, I guess. So I kind of tried to dive a little bit more into async await and was very, very happy with kind of what it ended up being and what it is.
Yeah. I think for async await, this is definitely something that you need to play with because it is different. Being able to use actors and stuff can be like tremendously life-changing in terms of like how you organize your code. And you might think, oh, well, like I can design this crazy system and it'll be super cool because it uses actors, and look at the code. It's like super simple. But then you start to hook that up to your UI and you're like, oh yeah, I click a button and I need my actor to do something. So task and then open curly brace and you do something with your actor. And then you were like, okay, now I need to use it in delegate methods, and like, how do I do that? And that's when it all starts to kind of collapse a tiny bit. because a lot of us haven't really played with actors and they're not super great in that specific set of circumstances, for instance. But you only really realize that once you start using them, right?
Right.
And until you start using them, you're never really going to learn those lessons. For instance, well, serialization is kind of out the door. You don't have first in, first out when you make requests to actors. It's whatever is available at any given time. That's why it's performant. So you can either implement a first in, first out queue, or you would have to change the way your app works so that way it can behave correctly if that order is not super necessary. Or you might be wondering, well, like, okay, I have a long running operation. How do I like check the progress on it? Well, like the whole mentality of having a progress object that you listen to is kind of not the way to do things with async await. You're kind of expected to return an async sequence instead, and that sequence can be your progress. Like as you consume it, you know the progress of how far you are along with it, right? But that involves like using an async sequence and knowing the gotchas there and how to work around them. So I think it's going to be a little while before UI apps really take full advantage of this async await world.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of transformations that happen to our UI frameworks to more readily integrate with that. For instance, a button action, there's no reason why that can't be an async context, right? Why not? Just let the button trigger into it, and that can come with a whole bunch more UI paradigms that are no longer dependent on things like delegates, which is kind of the old world of UIKit, and it's not really present in the new world of SwiftUI. So I can definitely see a lot more things just being async native as time goes on. It's just going to take a while to get there, right?
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of the upside of Vapors. You don't have to worry about that. And so
it's already async native.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the world you're in. The entry point is async, the exit point is async, and as long as you play by those rules, everything is super fast.
Yeah, I've almost not had to touch actors at all. I think I made one actor for like I don't know, it's been a while since I looked at that code, but it's mostly just like marking things as async and then calling await, and that's it. So I haven't really dove into the deeper parts of making actors and for example using the main actor, because it's just there isn't one, or maybe there is, but yeah, I don't use it or whatever. Anyway, it would be fun to kind of, looking forward, I guess, dive more into async await in that sense, and get a deeper understanding like you have. So yeah.
What are you looking forward to the most for next year?
I think, well, kind of continuing with async await, definitely, just like I said, moving on with that and trying to implement it. I don't know. I think I always just want to try to keep learning things, and I think a lot of that comes down to like trying to stay on top of whatever gets announced in DubDub, and just the changes in Swift, so I don't feel like again, like with Codable, I don't feel like an old man. I'm like, I'm gonna stick with JSON serialization, that's the way. Just trying to keep up and like I don't know. I always feel like I want to kind of keep myself in a nice place where I'm comfortable, and I want to try to kind of push out from that and continue to learn things. And at work we have every 6 months we have kind of review, like bi-yearly reviews, and talking about what we'd like to do. And I'm working on this app that has so much to it, and I'm scratching the surface of everything that it does. I mean, we're doing audio processing and video processing, and we're using Metal, and there's all of this stuff kind of around me peripherally that I'm not touching. And so I think for me, I'd love to like try to learn some of that stuff, even if it's just a little bit. I mean, trying to understand how we set up the timeline for our app alone is just insane, and everything that I use is just very superficial, like working on UI bugs or trying to figure out networking stuff, getting stuff from Google Drive or whatever. So, trying to dig deeper into lower level code. It's, I guess, for me hard to look at, like when Andrew Madsen or my boss puts in a pull request and it's about synchronizing 2 tracks of audio and generating waveforms and stuff. It's like there's so much that I don't know. So I've kind of come to terms with like the imposter syndrome of like not knowing everything, and I'm just trying to like incrementally improve, I guess, like as a personal resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that probably mostly takes the form of like, what are the new things in DubDub, like I said, that I can implement perhaps into either my work apps or into personal apps, whether it's this paper project or whatever. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really work on my own personal apps currently because I'm just working at work, and I have this thing with Ben that kind of takes all of the time I want to work. But it would probably be good to, work on something. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm getting to that same point where that itch that I want to scratch the most is to work on my own like software again. And that's something that you can't really satisfy by working for others, because there will always be like these tidal forces that bring you to different places that kind of escape that need that we sometimes have. So I think for me, what I'm looking for the most is probably getting back into that and finding some time where I can enjoy like working on that unique project that doesn't fulfill a business need, right? It's just something that fulfills a useful need, or a solution that I personally need, or something that I wanted to explore, right? And I think that being able to find the time to do that is exceptionally hard. But once you kind of get started, then it makes it a lot easier, right? And as you said, like sometimes it involves like learning new things and being on top of everything. Like this is the first year that I think I have been so overwhelmed. I did not go and explore everything that system settings has, for instance. Like I have traditionally always gone into all the new apps that get installed on the system, and I go poking around and I say, okay, what's in this preference? Oh, got it. This is where this moved. So and so. And that has always helped me in the silliest ways, namely when people call like, hey, my computer's broken. Then you can go ahead and like give them direct, like open system preference, system settings. And then, okay, on that left bar, you see the like, okay, go to the third section, click on this. And I have like a mental map of all those things that I don't have for the first time. And that is both like liberating because it has allowed me to think of other things this year that I just haven't had a chance to think about before, because my brain has obviously been saturated with system preferences, tips and tricks that are no longer needed. But I also had the chance to like learn completely different sets of skills. Like for instance, this year I learned how React works on the web, and that's not something that I ever would have like dove into myself, right? Like I am like staunchly into native development, and I would never build a native app using this, but that has been a very useful skill to learn, because now if I wanted to write a website, I'm probably not going to just do it the vanilla HTML and JavaScript way. I would probably use React, because it is a very powerful thing, and it, much like SwiftUI, it kind of changes how you can think about solving a problem, and I think that can be very useful. So I think using everything that I did learn last year is probably what I'll be doing this year, to kind of try to make something with it, right? And I know it's kind of nebulous in terms of like what that actually means because I don't really know yet. But yeah, I definitely want to start doing productive things on my personal time, which has been so limited that I wear the shirt that says I paused my game to be here, which is like a Christmas shirt. And the irony is that I don't play video games. Like I haven't played a video game in months or like the better part of a year. Like I opened up Skyward Sword on Christmas Day, having bought it months prior. And like I ended up buying it so long ago, the gold points that you get on Nintendo Switch for like having the cartridge, like those expired. Like I was just going through all the Switch games I bought that were still wrapped up. I was like, oh, let's put this one. Oh, these points are expired. Next. So yeah, I would say like I need a cleanup time to like zen out and categorize everything. So I'm using this end of the year to do that, and I hope to come out of that refreshed and encouraged to kind of build something that I want to build, right? And I have like so many ideas, so many in fact that like I don't even know what I want to start with, and maybe I won't start on any of them as a result of that. But I want to come out feeling better, right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I think that's the hardest part is like either you have a bunch of ideas and you don't know what to do, or like I'd mentioned, I have like a list of projects that I've like personal projects that I've done, and I haven't had an idea for one in a long time. But I think this thing that I'm doing with Ben has been nice because it's been a large enough Vapor app that I've had to. It's more than a toy app, you know what I mean? Like I actually have to put some thought into like the database and all of the different endpoints that you would need and everything. Like the second largest Vapor app that I've done is like the one that controls my ceiling speaker amp, and it's not anything special. So this one is quite a bit larger, like orders of magnitude larger, which is awesome. So that's been like fun for me. I think that's always been the thing that over the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I've been the most excited about is Vapor. So having a project to work on that would let me do that and kind of explore it in a more wide-reaching way has been really kind of fun. I look forward to, a personal app that I can do with Vapor, whatever it would be. I don't really know. But at this point, I feel much more confident. And so like that's been the goal all along, is just to try to get better. And unfortunately, that's not something I can like directly apply to like my job or anything. In most senses, the most applicable thing is async await. But regardless, it's been super fun, and like I'm super glad that Vapor exists because it's I think one of my favorite things that I've learned.
And it's you don't end up getting the experience that you need without working on these kinds of things, right? Like unless you are building out backend with Vapor, you're not going to learn about how to build out a backend with Vapor, right?
Yeah.
Like I have for the longest time always wanted to learn how to like push render instructions via Metal to like draw stuff on the screen. I think that would be really cool to learn, but I've never gone to the point of learning it because I've never like gone to the point of needing to use it, right? And it's that motivation and that push that will get you past that learning stage, which is frustrating, onto the track where you can be productive with something. You just need to do it. And that's like the hardest piece of it. And finding the time to do it, not neglecting other responsibilities while you're finding the time to do it. And like playing that whole balancing game, right? If only life were like video games where you can just like use resources freely and not feel like you are actually using your actual like life energy in that process. Yes. It's like, oh yeah, my HP is down to 10, but I'll totally recover that afterwards. It's like, meanwhile in real life, when your HP hits 10, you're like, oh no, bad things are happening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like yes, I might have a savings. I ain't spending that savings to do anything. Like you become like terrified of that. But in a video game, it's like, oh yeah, you saved up all this gold or rupees or whatnot. And you just flat out use it all at once.
I'll make more. It's all good.
Exactly. And maybe we need to approach life like that a little bit, right? It certainly feels like some people play life like that. And if you watch enough YouTube, they certainly throw things around in that way. But like, it's terrifying because it's your own life that you're dealing with, right? But yeah, maybe that's the secret to success. Just gotta throw caution to the wind and just blow your savings to invest in the next thing, right?
I don't know. You got to get good RNG. That's the whole thing, though. Doesn't work for everyone.
Does not work for everyone. No, it does not. This week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Explain It Slowly. Have you ever wondered how anime is made, or how old TVs work, or even why you start picking up other people's accents just by hanging out with them? Welcome to Explain It Slowly, a podcast where Lynn and I explore any and every topic, from technology to food, twice a week. We've covered everything from SSDs to food comas, and can't wait to share what we learned next with all of you. So open up your favorite podcast app and search for Explain It Slowly to learn something new with us every week. We want to thank Explain It Slowly for sponsoring our show. Search for Explain It Slowly on your favorite podcast app, or visit https://explainitslowly.show to learn more. So, Spencer, I've got a code completion tip for you. And this is related to something we talked about last week, and that is self-executing closures. So last week we were talking a little bit about these magic if statements, how in a future version of Swift you might be able to use an if statement as like a return, or something that can return a value to like a variable, for instance. And you could do that today. You can say like let my variable equals, and then you can open up a curly brace, type anything you want, have it return a value, close that curly brace, and then open close parentheses, as if you were calling a function. And that's called a self-executing closure. And they have a lot of uses in Swift. Namely, if you've ever declared a lazy variable, you've probably seen a self-executing closure attached right onto it. And they are really, really practical for that, because it allows you to, say in UIKit land, declare all of your views and your subviews as these self-contained units that kind of configure themselves. And they will just run through the closure that you provide then and there. You don't have to have it live in another method or anything. And then they'll return the value directly into that that lazy property. And then they'll remember that value from that point forward. So then you don't have to go ahead and execute it again. Or you can execute it again. Like if you need to, you can set it to nil and have things reoccur. Like, these can be used for all sorts of things. I've seen them used a lot in line with functions, so that way you can have some complex conditional logic, for instance, which we may no longer need once we have these better if and switch statements. But until then, it makes for a great way to kind of get a value for something, have it be declared in one place, and not need to necessarily declare a variable and then set the variable in each of your conditions. You can just return it. So self-executing closures are great for that. And if you check the show notes, I've linked to a whole article that goes into depth about them. Be sure that if you're using them with properties, that you kind of only use them with lazy properties. Because if you use self in a self-executing closure, it has a different meaning in any property other than a lazy one. For instance, if you have var my property equals and then self-executing closure in there, and self in that case refers to the function itself, the closure, not the class or instance that you're in, because it doesn't exist yet. Your instance is literally being constructed then and there. So there's no self. So do be careful with that, especially when setting self to things like a delegate or a data source. That won't work unless it's a lazy property. So that's like my only word of caution when using these. As with everything, there's like pros and cons. But they are a very useful tool, and they can help make your code a lot cleaner and a lot easier to read.
Nice. I love whenever we like talk about self and like you're like self doesn't exist yet. It like becomes semi-philosophical all of a sudden.
It's it's one of those things where like I always wondered like what is self like in Objective C? It's literally just an argument that's passed into methods.
Right.
Like that's the secret, and that's what it's doing in Swift too. Super is a little bit more nebulous, and I always found that one a little bit more interesting. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can't do things with super that you can do with self, for instance. There are certain restrictions placed on it. Yeah, language magic at its
Yes,
best, right?
absolutely.
Um, in over in hardware land, I hear you have a new little device that you'd like to go over today.
Yes. So for the mini review corner, I've actually had this for a while, but I a while ago I bought a pair of headphones secondhand just here locally, and the guy included this thing sort of along with it, and the price was like right for just the headphones, but it also had this along with it, so I was like, okay, I'll take it. It's called the FiiO BTR3K, I think, and it's this little tiny dongle thing. And so what it is it has a 3.5 millimeter jack and I think 2.5 millimeter balanced output. And really, all it is a Bluetooth dongle, basically. So you can plug your wired headphones into this, turn it on. It's got a battery, and you can connect it to anything as if they were like wireless headphones. So, like, I just recently bought a pair of headphones from the website formerly known as Massdrop. Now it's just Drop. These Meze Noir headphones. They're really nice and they sound really good. And I was playing some games the other day, and in my bedroom, and my TV's on the other side of the room, so I plugged the headphones into this, and then just connected my PC to this, and had wireless audio, and it was super nice, just like sitting on my bed and having some really good kind of like the soundtrack for the game I was playing was good, so just kind of jamming out to that while I was playing. But it'll connect to like your phone, your PC, whatever, your Mac, anything. So kind of a cool way to like if you have some nice wired headphones, it's a good way to connect them wirelessly, and it's like technically like an amp and everything too. So it has power to drive like high impedance headphones. It also has a USB-C port on the other side, so you can use it as like a DAC and just directly connect it to your Mac as like a USB audio interface as well. So kind of
Nice.
like if the battery on this thing goes bad, I can just kind of dedicate it as like a you know DAC right into my Mac, and I don't really have to worry about it being kind of a paperweight or anything. So yeah, it's cool. It's like $60 or $70, I think, new on Amazon, and FiiO makes a bunch of different kind of levels of these. I don't know what you call them, Bluetooth dongle things. This is like the lowest tier, and it works great for what I need. I'm not powering like 600 ohm headphones or anything, so I don't need anything super beefy. So yeah, check it out if you're interested. It's been a kind of a cool way to actually use my nicer headphones when I don't want to use my AirPods, even just like listening to music on my phone. So yeah.
Nice. I wonder if a device like this might work with the Apple TV's like ARC output. I know like the Apple TV can like route audio from your TV to things like AirPods. So I'm
Right.
wondering if that would also work with just arbitrary Bluetooth headphones. And then you can use this with your
Maybe.
good headphones and just like listen to
Watch
TV
movies through.
solo without like worrying about bothering neighbors or whatnot, and
Yeah.
get that full experience.
I'd assume that you can. I'll have to try it out on my Apple TV though. I will report back.
As always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter or mastodon.social at Code Completion to know when new episodes go live, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development, It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buniol. That's DimitriBouniol. And we'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye. So on the topic of obsolescence, I've replaced my entire Wi-Fi set. I'm not just kidding.
Oh no.
Can you imagine after I spent so much time and effort and money? But no, I like am nearing the completion stage of my home network overhaul, or as Spencer calls it, the baller network. And I think I finally solved all the issues that I was having with HomeKit and Ubiquiti stuff. And a lot of this stems from the fact that not all like IoT devices only like 2.4 gigahertz nowadays. Mm-hmm. They also enjoy the 5 gigahertz connections that they can get. So it's not like totally proper to just sequester them onto their own 2.4 band network and be done with it. Right. But also, like, I want to start making use of like the 6G capable device in my house, which is, there's just one. It's the iPad Pro M2. But oh boy, is it nice when that connects to Wi-Fi. Like I think I was just running some iPerfs last night, and I was getting 1,600 megabits down, like That's to awesome. A local file server. So that is like very nice to have over Wi-Fi. It's totally better than gigabit. If that wasn't obvious. And yeah, like this is the new world that I very much look forward to having more devices step into. And I tweeted as such, like I can't wait for the next iPhone, the next MacBooks to have some more capable Wi-Fi capabilities. But that needed some setup that was a little bit more complicated than I was hoping. So what did I change to make things work well? Notably, I noticed that I could get things working. Like I can restart all the switches in my house, for instance, and then they would work. But then the next day, I would wake up and I'm like, well, it's time for bed. Or I would wake up, go through the day, and I would be like, well, it's time for bed. Let's ask the nice lady in a can to dim the lights. And then the bedroom lights are not responding. And then you have to get up. Like that's the worst when you get used to that kind of thing working, and then you have to like get up to go to the switch, which is a few steps away, but you're like all comfy and warm. Yeah, it's not the best feeling, but happens. But I wanted to solve that, so I noticed that I could fix it for the day, and it would break the next day. And I was wondering like why was this happening? And my working hypothesis was that when all the access points like stay awake overnight, they go ahead and choose new channels to jump to, in terms of like, oh, the neighbors are not using this or the neighbors are not using that. And that might be one of the reasons why the stupider smart devices were not coming along for the ride. They were basically staying on the old channel and being like, well, it's awfully quiet here, and I'll just wait for my next command, and it never really came because everything went to a different channel. And part of that might be because one access point might have, the one that they were connected to, hopped to a new channel, but another access point in the house, because I have multiple, went to the channel that it was on previously. Mm-hmm. So like there's all sorts of scenarios that these devices were probably not made to really like handle well. And therefore I did a lot of research into like picking channels, channel widths, how the bonding happens, and how to get the most speed out of things. So I made a bunch of changes. Namely, the main change I did was pick a channel for every one of my access points. So I have 6 access points around the house. Almost one per room, and you might be wondering, well, that's silly because one access point can kind of service an entire area and it can go quite far. But 5G and 6G can't really penetrate walls that well. So I basically took that to my advantage. I decreased the power output significantly on all of them, so they're really not penetrating walls at all. But within that room, they're doing excellent. So that gives kind of at least one device per room to have almost all the bandwidth available to it, because that's another limitation of Wi-Fi is it's kind of a time sharing sort of thing that's happening. The access point will go ahead and say like, hey, iPhone, I have a bunch of information for you. Send it to the iPhone. And the iPhone says, okay, here's the stuff I need to send to you. And then the access point is like, hey, iPad, I have some information for you. And the iPad gets all that. And then the iPad is like, okay, here's some information I'm giving back. And it will go through your devices like that. So if you have a bunch of devices, especially if you have hundreds of devices, they're just going to be time sharing that window in time, going to each one of them, giving them an opportunity to connect, send, or receive data. And that's why like you can have Wi-Fi at all. Otherwise, it's kind of just blinking to everything all at once, and everyone's kind of hearing each other's traffic because there's no wire, right? It's just all going. There's no parallelizability here except on multiple channels. So I made sure that every single access point had unique channels that did not overlap. For 2.4 gigahertz, this means that you have 1, 6, and 11 to choose from. Those are it. Don't go ahead and pick wide channels on the 2.6 gigahertz band, because you can have wide channels, but only if you have one access point. And that does not really work that great. So that is mostly limited to the slower, still capable, but more long distance connections that you might need when you're like approaching your house or when you're about to drive off and you just need that maps data to come in. That's totally fine for it. For everything else, for like actually connecting to the internet, that's probably going to be happening over 5G on most of your devices. So I had to pick channels for that too. I originally set that to auto and things were still disconnecting on me, and that's because the light switches were connecting to 5G because they determined that was a better connection for where they were in the house. So that was also something that I needed to go ahead and lock down. So yeah, through trial and error, I finally got to the point where nothing is disconnecting anymore. I also noticed that the U6 Enterprises, which is the access point that I have above me that support 6G, they don't seem to support choosing channels for all of the 6G spectrum. So it's like only the first half, which I found a little bit weird. So I'll report back when I learn more there. But that's more than enough for what I need right now. So that's not too big of an issue.
Nice. That's cool. So I just like jumped into my Unify setup to see what I was doing. So like you turned off nightly channel optimization.
Basically, yeah.
Manually chose the channel.
Yeah. And a nice thing is that Unify's access points, you can tell them to scan, and they will scan. Yeah. They will scan and see what spectrum is being used at that given moment in time, which is super useful for choosing channels, because then you can go ahead and say, well, the neighbors are all on these DFS channels, DFU.
I don't know.
There's a certain set of channels that are available, but then they were like, they're only available when we're not using them, and we, in this case, is the U.S. government, because they use them for like military and stuff like that. That said, I read up a whole bunch, because apparently they're way slower to connect to for roaming and stuff like that, and therefore most devices won't end up being on them. But that all changed in like 2021 and stuff like that, so they're kind of just available. So if your devices support it, then go ahead and use it. Not all devices will support it, so I recommend only using them if you have a multi-access point setup and you wouldn't mind some older devices sticking to the older available channels. And this is just on the 5 gigahertz spectrum, so it's not too big of a deal otherwise. But yeah, Wi-Fi is complicated. Another thing that I did is I have a specific Wi-Fi network for 6G. People might be asking, well, let me try that again. People might be like asking is if this is similar to when people set up a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 gigahertz network. Not at all. So this separate 6G enabled network has 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz on it as well. And that's actually necessary for 6G to operate properly. And your Apple devices will complain if you connect to a 6G only network that doesn't have the corresponding 5 gigahertz and 2.4. So the difference here is that on my regular networks that everything has been connected to up until now, that's 2.4 and 5 only. And on the 6G network, that's a completely separate SSID with 2.4, 5, and 6 on it. But since I know older devices are not going to be connecting to it, this is just going to be the brand newest of devices. I went ahead and clicked all the bells and whistles that have come to Wi-Fi since. So like fast roaming, fast authentication. And that's where I've been experimenting with all of that stuff. So that one is WPA3 only. There's no other way to like sign into it. It's only on the latest and greatest stuff. So if you have an older device, it's not going to see that network basically as something it can ever connect to. And that's fine. Like you can have multiple SSIDs that do different things that have different services enabled for them. So that's something that I did do in this situation, because otherwise you can't use 6G unless you're using the newest encryption standards as well. So that kind of would seclude the rest of your network if you didn't do anything special for that. So if you are kind of interested in exploring a 6G network, go ahead and set up a separate SSID for it. And then go ahead and turn on all the modern things, because iPhone and iOS devices and Macs, they all support all the modern things. So you're not going to have any trouble there. Internet of Tech type devices, they'll probably run into trouble. But as Thread becomes more and more of a thing, you'll probably need to connect them to Wi-Fi a whole lot less anyways. So that's less of a concern.
Kind of a weird transitionary place we're in, I suppose, for that kind of stuff then.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. That's super cool. Glad you got it figured out.
I will see for sure after like a week, because who knows, right? I also use the moment in time to finally swap out the Apple TV for the newer Apple TV. And of course, HomeKit is like, I can't find your living room Apple TV. Your Home Hub is missing. And I'm like, yes, I removed it from the Home app, and I don't know why you still think it exists. Needless to say, there are still issues in that capacity, but stability-wise, it has been a whole lot better for at least a few days. So that's been the silver lining.
Nice.
Yeah, let me see if it's still showing that even after restarting. Yep, still showing that even after restarting. So, So that's a Apple Home app special, I guess.
Nice.
That's all I got.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.